Hello and welcome to our next Warsaw University Astronomical Observatory Tuesday seminar series. Today our speaker is Neha Singh from our own observatory. She's the last year PhD student who's about to have her viva quite soon. So as a practice, she will tell us about the content of her thesis in an extended version. Her supervisor is Professor Tomasz Bulik, and Neha is going to tell us about the Einstein telescope. Please, Neha.
Thank you so much. Okay, so let me start. So in this talk, we are going to discuss certain questions. Firstly, I'll explain what is Einstein telescope and how does it compare with the current and advanced ground-based detectors. Then we'll move on to find out the compact binary sources as sources of gravitational waves. What are the parameters of these sources and how well can we constrain them using Einstein telescope as a standalone detector. Once we have this algorithm to constrain the binary parameters, then we will move on to analyze the populations of compact binaries, and we'll find out how much, what can Einstein telescope see as a standalone detector. Let us start. The Einstein telescope is a future third generation wide band gravitational wave detector, and it is expected to have a wide band sensitivity from about 1 hertz to 10 kilohertz. It is expected to be built few meters underground. This is so as to constrain the seismic noise which affects the current ground-based detectors, which are based on ground rather than underground. There are certain possible sites for Einstein telescope. One of them is in Sardinia, Italy. The second one is in Maastricht, near the three border region of Belgium, Germany, and Netherlands. There is a third option, which is a new one, and is still preliminary. It's in Saxony, Germany. Einstein telescope is expected to be operational in the mid-2030s. Recently, there was a conference held by the Einstein Telescope Observational Science Board, and the ET steering committee presented this slide to show the timeline that was presented to ESFRI. Now, Einstein Telescope proposal has been added to ESFRI, and as can be seen from this slide, the site for Einstein Telescope is expected to be decided by 2025. The commissioning is expected to start by the late 2030s, and the science run will begin 5 years later. The current accepted design for Einstein telescope is ETD. Before this design, there were multiple other designs which were considered. One of them is ETB, which was designed to have 10-kilometer arm length with a 60-degree opening arm angle. The two detectors in this design were expected to be co-aligned, and each of these two detectors had a single interferometer in this. The current detection method for gravitational waves is Michelson interferometry. So in these detectors were expected to have one Michelson interferometer in each detector. The next design considered was ETC. The design of ETC is known as the xylophone design, which has 3 gravitational wave detectors, with each detector having 2 interferometers. This same design was accepted for ETD, with the improvement that now in case of ETD, the noise estimate considered were more realistic. So now the ETD design will have the xylophone design with 3 detectors, 60-degree opening arm angle. It will have an arm length of 10 kilometers. And the larger the arm length, the larger is the sensitivity of gravitational wave detectors. So this will be a very sensitive gravitational wave detector. One of the interferometers will be optimized for better detection in the low frequency range, and the other interferometer will be optimized to have a better sensitivity in the high frequency range. There are multiple noise sources which limit the frequency floor, which limit the frequency, the sensitivity floor. And so in one of the interferometers, the noises will be optimized for better sensitivity towards the low frequency, while in the case of other interferometer, it's otherwise. Now, what are the advantages of Einstein telescope's design? One of the main one is that Einstein telescope as a single detector can generate null stream. If you have multiple gravitational wave detectors and the orientations are such that the net strain of all combined detectors is zero, then in that case, the data stream is known as null stream, and ideally there should be no gravitational wave signal in such a data stream. If there is a signal in such a case, then that is a glitch. So essentially, this is an essential method to identify glitches in the detector data. If you have two co-aligned uh, right angle detectors, in that case also you can generate a null stream. If we look at the antenna pattern for an L-shaped detector, and the left figure shows antenna pattern. The detector in this case is assumed to be in the XY plane. So we see that there is a dependence about the phi angle. What this means is the L-shaped detector is not sensitive to both the polarizations of gravitational waves equally. Essentially, what it detects is a linear combination of both the polarizations, but it cannot resolve the two polarizations on its own. If you have a second L-shaped detector, which is oriented at 45 degrees, then in that case, you will be able to resolve the two polarizations and hence test the general relativity and resolve the geometry of the source itself. When we look at the antenna pattern for Einstein telescope in the triangular design, then we see this is the antenna pattern for it. We still assume the detector is in the XY plane. We see that since there is no phi dependence of the antenna pattern, that means the detector will be equally sensitive to both the polarization states and hence will be able to resolve those polarization states on its own. Essentially, what this means is if you have three right angled detectors which are oriented to each other with respect to 120-degree angle and 240-degree angle, so they act in the same manner as this Einstein telescope alone. So what we can say is that the third detector is a virtual interferometer composed of the other two. This plot shows the antenna pattern for Einstein telescope assumed to be located at Virgo site. So this is the antenna pattern in the celestial reference of frame of reference rather than the detector frame of reference, as I showed previously. What I wanted to show in this plot is that there is no blind spot in the sky. So essentially, Einstein telescope will have a full sky coverage. There will be no blind spot. Now, this is a movie that I'm trying to show is for every 10 minutes for about 8 hours of data. So we can see the slow dependence of antenna pattern on time. Now, as I mentioned about the noise floor for Einstein telescope, so in this plot, I'm showing the sensitivity curves for all the previous designs and the current ET design for Einstein telescope. We can see that the green curve is for ETB and it shows a much poorer sensitivity towards the low frequency range as compared to the other two. The blue curve shows the ETC design, which is much better compared to ETD, but that was assuming an idealistic noise estimate. When you take realistic assumptions, then it is the one that is shown for ETD. The dotted line is the one shown for ETD high frequency interferometer, where the noises will be optimized for a better sensitivity in the high frequency range. And the dot dash line shows the noises to be optimized to have a better detection in the low frequency range. So essentially, the net band of ET detection range is from 1 hertz to 10 kilohertz. Now, what does this wide band imply for an astrophysical detection? This is a plot taken from Satyaprakash et al. And it shows the reach of Einstein telescope in terms of redshift as well as in the source frame total mass. So this compares the three kind of detectors, the advanced LIGO, the Cosmic Explorer shown in pink, and Einstein telescope shown in green. What we see here is if you consider stellar mass black holes from a total mass of about 20 200 hertz. Is the cursor visible or no? So what we see here is that so for stellar mass black holes from about 20 solar mass to 100 solar masses,
We
Einstein.
do see your cursor. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. So the Einstein telescope can see up from redshift 20 to and beyond. So essentially, Einstein telescope will be able to probe the dark ages. When also the total mass, the maximum range of total mass detectable by Einstein telescope will be much higher as compared to the current detectors. If you see the total mass source, total source frame mass of about 1000 solar masses and higher, that means here, then you can see that it can detect from up to redshift 1 to 5. If you go to the lower end of the masses for binary neutron star sources, for which the total mass is about 3 solar masses, here then it can detect from up to redshift 2 and 3. That is much larger than what is expected for even advanced LIGO or WRBCO. So what this detection ranges means is that for Einstein telescope, in addition to the vast range in terms of redshift and total mass, the volume detectable by Einstein telescope will also be much larger. So about 1000 times larger. So what this means is the detection rates will be much higher as compared to the current detectors. In case of Einstein telescope, it will detect about 10 to the power 5 to a million black hole binaries per year and about 7 and 10 to the power 4 binary neutron star coalescence per year. This makes Einstein telescope an essential tool for population studies. But the crucial step for doing population studies is that we have to break the mass redshift degeneracy. So the analysis aims to do exactly this. How do we do this using Einstein telescope as a single detector? In order to understand this, let's start from what do we detect when we say that there is a detection of coalescing compact binary systems. So this plot shows the first detection. In the lower plot, you see the frequency time map shown in case of Hanford and Livingstone. So this map gives you the information about the change in frequency with time. The coalescing compact binaries are also known as chirping binaries because the frequency and the amplitude increases with time as the orbit shrinks and the energy is radiated away in gravitational waves. So crudely, what information you can extract from these maps is firstly, you know what is the maximum frequency emitted. You know what is the rate of change of frequency. The chirp mass by definition depends on frequency and the rate of change of frequency. So if you know the frequency and the rate of change of frequency, you know the chirp mass. And then this also gives you the maximum frequency. The important point to keep in mind is that these quantities are in the detector frame and hence are the redshifted values that we detect. So what we know is redshifted chirp mass and the redshift frequency. How do we use that? Essentially, when you detect the gravitational waves polarizations H plus and H cross, what you see in a detector as a strain in the detector HT is the projection of these polarizations. So F plus times H plus and F cross times H cross. So these antenna patterns F plus and F cross are essentially the functions of three angles and time. Three angles meaning the location in the sky theta phi, and the psi is a polarizing angle. This quantity is known as the chirp mass, and this is the total mass. So now if you see the Fourier transform of the strain in the detector, it is given as this. The important point to notice in this expression is this function theta. This function theta is the one that contains all the angular parameters defining the binary. That means the two angles which specify its location in the sky, the inclination of the plane of the orbit, and the psi is the polarization angle. The inclination comes in here. The three angles are included in this antenna pattern F plus and F cross. So this is the essential quantity in our analysis to start with. If we can constrain this, then it will lead to our next steps. Before we start the analysis, the question is, do we know anything about this theta effective before we start the analysis? So using the expressions for F plus and F cross for Einstein telescope, if we plot the probability density for theta effective, then this is the plot that we get. This plot tells us that not all the angles are equally probable. So there is a certain probability distribution for these angles. So essentially, we already have a constraint on the angles. What does this mean? What it means is that if you have a detection, you know the signal to noise ratio, you know the redshifted chirp mass, and you know the F max. Now, if you can somehow have the information on this quantity theta, then you can constrain the luminosity distance. Now, if you assume a certain cosmology, then given the luminosity distance, it tells you the redshift of the source. If you know the redshift and you know the redshifted chirp mass from the observation, then you can essentially break the chirp mass redshift degeneracy. You will know the chirp mass and redshift individually. So how do we do that? We need to constrain this quantity theta effective, which constrains all the angular parameters. Essentially, if you have multiple detectors located at faraway locations, you can use the method of triangulation to constrain the angles. But in case of Einstein telescope, there are although 3 detectors, but all 3 detectors are co-located. So essentially, we cannot use a method of triangulation to constrain theta. So what we do is, since the detection of a source gives us the SNR in 3 detectors, we can take the ratios of the 3 SNRs, and we see, if we write it in this form, that the ratios constrain the angles. So the angles can be easily constrained by knowing the ratios of the SNRs in 3 detectors. So this is what we do to constrain it. So this is the map which shows the constrained values of theta phi, that is the localization of the binary source in the sky for a source which generated these SNRs in the 3 detectors. These are the source SNR values. So what we see here is, in the blue star, you see the source location, the actual source location. The probabilities or densities are shown here in red. So you see that there are 8 images. Why are there 8 images? Because in the case of theta function, there is a symmetry about theta and minus theta. So this gives the reflected values of about the theta plane. Theta is equal to 0 plane. And there is also a degeneracy about for a 90-degree rotation. So these are, for this reason, you get these 8 values. So this analysis was done assuming that the signal is short, in our case, short within 5 minutes. And then we have the segment analysis, this analysis of the signal, and by taking the ratios of the SNR, we constrain the angular parameters. Now, once you have the constraint of the angular parameters, what we did was we simulated about, So once you have the constraint on the theta effective, the goal was to break the chirp mass redshift degeneracy. So how do we do that? We take the information that we got from the previous constraints. We add the information that we have from the observation. The information from the observation was on the redshifted chirp mass, the maximum frequency, and the SNR. And we take into account the priors on these parameters. Once you have these, you can have the estimates on the parameters, which is the chirp mass, redshift, luminosity distance, mass, and mass ratio Q. So this estimate was done assuming the signal is short, and we wanted to know how well does the algorithm recover these parameters. So this plot shows the recovered values of chirp mass on the left and recovered values of redshift on the right. So, and the x-axis shows the actual source values. The y-axis shows the medians of the distributions which we recovered. So essentially, the contour on both these plots shows a 90-degree probability region. And we can see that in both the plots, the parameters are recovered correctly. In case of the plot in the right, you see that for higher redshifts, there is a lot of overestimation. This is because at higher redshift, the SNR generated in detector will be much lower, and lower SNR means higher errors on the observed parameters. This plot, here I show the errors that were estimated on the redshift and chirp mass for about 1500 binary sources, which we simulated to analyze short duration signals. You see that for a low SNR of about 10 on the left plot, the relative error on the chirp mass is about 30%. In case of redshift, the low SNR of 10 gives a relative error of about 40%. But as we go towards higher SNRs in both cases, the relative error is much smaller. Then now the question is, suppose the signal is larger, then how do we go about analyzing it? Essentially, if the binary source is lighter, it can stay in the Einstein telescope detection band from about minutes to several days. Since the Einstein telescope detection band is about from 1 Hz to 10 kHz, so it will stay for a larger duration. And in that duration, the rotation of the Earth will affect the antenna pattern. So essentially, we need to take into account the rotation of the Earth in the antenna pattern and analyze the signal. So how do we do this? If you look at this expression, this is the same expression as SNR that was shown before. It is simply rearranged to separate the variables which depend on the frequency and the ones that are characteristic of the source. What we did is assume that the signal is long, then in that case, we analyze the signal every 5 minutes. Since as I showed earlier, that the antenna pattern is a slow moving function of time. So for 5 minutes, the change in the antenna pattern can be neglected. So now if we have a segment of 5 minutes, what we do is constrain the values that are shown in red, because this quantity depends on the length of the segment. So we constrain this quantity, and since it is also characteristic of the source, so we can combine the probabilities of this quantity obtained in every segment. Let us call this quantity lambda for further discussion. So for each segment, we constrain this quantity, the angular parameters were constrained, and the combined probability here is shown in this plot. So let us see this. What is shown here in this movie is that this signal lasted in the detection band so long that there were about 16 segments of 5 minutes each. The last segment, of course, is shorter depending on the maximum frequency of the merger. So what we did was estimated the probability for each of the 16 segments and then combined them. So let us see this again. So what we see here is that there is a huge area of probability that was predicted by the first segment, and it got reduced in these two locations finally. So essentially, taking into account the information for each segment, improve the information for the next segment. So this is how we got a much reduced localization, taking into account the information from all the segments. In this case, the SNR generated shown here is the one generated in the last segment. You see that the blue dot shows the source location, and it is within the recovered distribution for localization. For this long signal analysis, we simulated about 40,000 sources, and we set a certain threshold for detection. So about 16,700 sources crossed that threshold, and the localization obtained for all these sources is shown in the cumulative plot here. A90 means the 90% area of localization. What we see here is most of the sources are not well localized and they are above 1000. So the dashed lines show the 50% probability and the 90% probability. So you see that most of the sources are here. Then about 0.01% are here. Okay, so once we know the constraints on the angles, in case of long signal analysis, this is how we constrain the probabilities for chirp mass and redshift. So on the left top plot, we show the plot for the priors that we assume on redshift and chirp mass. Essentially, this shows the 2D space of priors. On the left is the chirp mass, and the x-axis is the redshift. The blue dot shows the source. So we assume the prior that the sources are distributed uniformly in the co-moving volume, and we assume the flat prior on mass. Now, moving on to the top right plot, we use the information that the redshifted chirp mass is known from the detection. Using that information, this grid is reduced to this much. Then, since we also know the maximum frequency of gravitational wave, S max, we know the total mass of the binary system. Using the value of estimate of the total mass and the chirp mass, we can constrain the value of Q. So on the lower left plot, we see that using this information on Q, we can constrain the probability density, 2D probability density much further. And finally, when we use the information from all the segments which is contained in this quantity lambda, as I mentioned earlier, this 2D probability is constrained much strongly and is shown in the lower right plot. So you see that the blue dot is the source value of chirp mass and redshift, and this is exactly within the probability that was recovered. For the source that I discussed in the previous slide, since we obtained the joint probability of redshift and chirp mass, we can easily marginalize over one of the parameters and get the marginalized probabilities. So on the left plot, I show the redshift obtained, the marginalized probability of the redshift. On the right plot, I show the marginalized probability of the chirp mass. The red dot is the source, and the dashed lines show the 90% constraint on the distribution we obtained. So you see that the source is well within the 90% constraint values for this source. These plots show all the binary sources that were simulated for this analysis, and we checked how well are the median values as compared to this actual source value. Let us look at the plot on the left. The x-axis is the actual chirp mass source value. The y-axis is the median recovered value. The 90% contour, the 90% probability region for this 2D probability density is shown in the contour region, and it shows that for the values within this region, the mass median recovered is similar to that injected. So essentially, it is recovered symmetrically. If we move on to the plot showing the redshift values on the right, you see that after about 0.5 or 0.6, redshift of 0.5 and 0.6, there is an underestimation of these values. Why are those underestimated? Simply because as we move on to higher redshifts, the SNR becomes lower, and then the errors assigned to each of the parameters is much higher. Here we see that for all the binary sources that were simulated, what errors did we estimate on each of these parameters? On the left plot, we show the error estimated on the chirp, relative error on the chirp mass, and on the right plot shows the relative error on redshift. We see that for about SNR of 50, which will be typical for Einstein telescope, the relative error on chirp mass is less than 5%. And for a redshift, it's about 15%, which is much, much lower than before, since we included the information from all the segments. And if you go to higher SNRs, it is much lower. Now, since we have this algorithm to analyze long signals in the Einstein telescope detection band, the goal was to estimate the detectability and distinguishability of different kinds of populations, the populations which are separated in the chirp mass redshift space. So what we did is we generated three kinds of mock populations. One was population 1 and population 2. The second one was from population 3 stars. And then the third one was the binaries coming from the Gogler cluster population. We use a mass redshift informations from these papers, and then we use the star formation rate for the mock populations from these. In the plot, I show the star formation rate which we used for generating these mock populations. Given the star formation rate that we had, so this table shows the details of these three populations which we generated. NR is the number of binaries that are expected to merge within a year. And mock is the number of sources that we generated in the mock population for each of the binaries. So we generated about 25,000 sources in each of the three populations. So essentially, T mock is the time that is our time of mock population, meaning in what time these many sources will merge. There's also this chirp mass and redshift range for these population mentioned here in the last two rows. So in case of POP1, POP2, these are the results that we got from our analysis. Let us look at the redshift plot shown on the right. What we see here is that most of the 90% of the population is confined within redshift of 4. And for these binaries, we can estimate the redshift correctly. The algorithm estimates the redshift correctly. If we look at the plot for the chirp mass on the left, we see that there are about 5 density peaks in this population, 5 density peaks for the chirp mass. For each of these density peaks, the recovery is accurate and it's symmetrical, and there is essentially no bias seen in case of population 1, population 2 stars. This okay, so this is a lot of plots. Let us start from the plot shown in the top panel. The top panel shows the redshift and the chirp mass of all the binaries in the mock population for POP1 and POP2 stars. So these are all the binaries that were generated in this population. Then the middle plot shows the binaries which cross the detection threshold which we chose. So out of the top panel, the binaries which cross the threshold are shown in the middle panel. Then for these binaries shown in the middle panel which were detected, the estimated values are shown in the lower panel. What is essential result here is that if we look at the middle panel compared to the top panel, we see that the low mass stars here, they don't cross the threshold beyond redshift of about 3. So they are not detectable according to the threshold that we chose. Out of these which were detected, we slightly underestimate the redshift and slightly overestimate the chirp mass. This was not that clear in the previous plot. The other thing to see is the main density of masses is confined within mass range of 10 to 20 and about redshift of up till redshift of about 3. This mass density is recovered correctly and estimated correctly by our algorithm. Then moving on to the mock population of POP3 stars. If we look at the plot for the chirp mass shown on the left, we see that there are 2 density peaks and they are largely overestimated by the algorithm. Why is that? This can be explained from the plot on the right, which is the redshift plot. And it shows that the redshift estimation is highly underestimated simply because most of the binaries are located at higher redshift, that is redshift greater than 4. At such high redshift, the SNR is really small, which implies a larger error on the parameters. So essentially, we cannot estimate them accurately. This is a similar plot for POP3 stars as was discussed for POP1, POP2. The top panel shows the whole mock population that we generated for the POP3 stars. Out of these, the ones which cross the threshold are shown in the middle panel. Important thing to notice here is for these density peaks, most of the binaries are not detectable beyond redshift of about 11. Out of these detected binaries, for these detected binaries, the medians, which are the algorithm estimated, is shown in the lower panel. And we see that there is a large overestimation in the mass and the underestimation in case of redshift, and hence the spread. This contour contains the 90% probability density for this plot. Lastly, the population generated from the globular cluster populations. The results are shown here. On the left side, you see the chirp mass, and you see that there are 5 mass density peaks, probability density peaks in case of chirp mass. These density peaks, you see that the chirp mass is slightly overestimated. And when we go on to the redshift plot shown on the right, you see that the redshift is slightly underestimated. When we see at the bulk population shown here, we see that from the top panel, which shows all the binaries in the mock population, only those are detected which are, in case of low mass binaries, only those are detected which are within redshift of about 6 here. And for the whole population, due to the slight overestimation in chirp mass and underestimation of redshift, we see the smearing of this density plot. But essentially, the density contained in the mass density plot is recovered correctly and is shown here within the contour of 90%. Yes, so the mass, mainly the density range about 20 to 25 is recovered here correctly. Now the another goal of this analysis was, if you have these different kinds of population, can you distinguish them with Einstein telescope as a single detector? So this is the main plot which shows where we show all the 3 populations together. The contours show the 90% population region of each of them. So the yellow contour shows the 90% region for the population 1 and population 2 binaries. The red contour is for the globular cluster population, and the blue one is for the population 3 stars. Essentially, what we conclude from this plot is that these 3 populations are distinguishable with Einstein telescope alone. So essentially, if the populations are separate in mass redshift space to start with, they are distinguishable by Einstein telescope. So the conclusion is that Einstein telescope as a single detector can constrain the angular parameters without triangulation. And this constraint on angular parameters is sufficient to break the chirp mass redshift degeneracy. Einstein telescope can thus constrain these parameters up to 4% and 15% for an SNR of about 50. And essentially, and most importantly, Einstein telescope can distinguish different binary populations which are separated in chirp mass redshift space. Well, that's all.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll do the clapping on behalf of everyone. Thank you for this talk, and we'll stop here. Thank you, Neha, very much.